At exactly 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, 10-year-old Amara Brooks was sitting on an overturned milk crate beside her blue bucket of flowers when she heard the words that stopped her heart. She was in her usual spot, 3 feet to the left of the grand revolving doors of the Prescott Grand Hotel, pressed against the limestone wall where the doorman allowed her to sit as long as she did not bother the guests. Her small hands were arranging the last of the day's bouquets, $5 bundles of daisies and baby's breath she had bought at the wholesale market that morning for 70 cents each. Her faded red jacket was zipped to her chin against the October air, and her thick curly hair was pulled into 2 puffs on either side of her head. She was invisible. She had been invisible for 7 months, ever since she started selling flowers outside this hotel to help her grandmother pay the electric bill. Hundreds of people walked past her every single day, men in expensive suits, women in heels and perfume, tourists dragging rolling suitcases, and not one of them saw her. She was furniture. She was the crack in the sidewalk. She was nothing. That was why Victor and Sergei did not notice her when they stepped behind the wide marble pillar 4 feet from her crate and began speaking in Russian. They did not know that Amara Brooks spoke Russian. Nobody knew except her grandmother Dorothy and her Aunt Denise. Nobody at this hotel had ever heard her speak more than 3 words in English. Flowers, $5. So the idea that this skinny 10-year-old in a faded red jacket could understand every syllable of rapid conversational Russian was as impossible to them as the idea that she existed at all. But Amara understood every word. Her mother had been Russian. Irina Volkov, born in St. Petersburg, raised in Moscow, had come to America at 19 with a single suitcase and a dictionary. She had fallen in love with Kevin Brooks at a community college English class, married him in a courthouse ceremony, and given birth to Amara in a hospital that smelled like disinfectant and hope. For 6 years, Irina had spoken to her daughter only in Russian at home, reading her fairy tales about Baba Yaga and singing her lullabies about birch trees and winter moons, while Kevin spoke to her in English at the dinner table and on Sunday drives. Amara had grown up with 2 tongues, 2 worlds, 2 ways of seeing everything. Then both worlds ended on the same rainy night when she was 6. And after that, Russian became the language Amara whispered to herself when she missed her mother so badly she thought her ribs would crack. Now, sitting on her milk crate at 5:47 p.m., she heard Victor say in Russian, "It is set. The device is under the driver's seat. When he turns the key at 6, it is done." And Sergei replied, "Orlov confirmed the payment. Tonight after it is finished." And Victor said, 13 minutes. We walk east on Lexington the moment he exits the building. We do not look back." Amara's fingers stopped moving. A daisy stem fell from her hand onto the concrete. She knew who he was. There was only one man who left this hotel at exactly 6 p.m. every single day, who walked through those revolving doors with his navy suit and his cold blue eyes and his jaw set like a man carrying the whole world on his shoulders and resenting every ounce of it. Only one man who turned the key of the same black car parked in the same spot at the curb at the same time, 6 o'clock, not 5:59, not 6:01, but 6 o'clock on the dot, every single day, 7 days a week, for as long as Amara had been sitting here. Julian Prescott, the owner of this hotel. The man who had walked past her more than 200 times and never once looked down. Amara's mouth went dry. Her hands began to tremble. She looked at the phone she did not own. She looked at the doorman 12 feet away, a tall man named Gerald who let her sit here but had never once asked her name. She looked at the revolving doors of the hotel, where guests spun in and out in a blur of silk and leather, and she thought about running inside and screaming for help. But who would believe her? Who would believe a 10-year-old street girl with a bucket of flowers saying that 2 of the most trusted security guards in the building were about to end their boss's life? She had 13 minutes. And the man she needed to save had never seen her face. If no one had ever looked at you, if the whole world had treated you like you did not exist, would you still risk everything to save a stranger's life? Would you still find the courage to speak up when no one had ever listened to you before? Tell me in the comments what you would do. And if you believe that every voice, no matter how small, deserves to be heard, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so that stories like this one never go unheard. Because what happens next will break your heart and put it back together again. 3 months earlier, in the middle of July, Amara Brooks had walked into the Garment District wholesale flower market at 6:30 in the morning with $11 in crumpled bills and a blue bucket she had found behind the laundromat on 10th Avenue. The market was a long, cold warehouse that smelled like roses and wet cardboard. Men in rubber boots pushed carts of wrapped flowers between the stalls, shouting prices and quantities in Spanish and Korean and English. Amara moved between them like a mouse between the legs of horses, small and quick and careful. She found a stall run by a woman named Mrs. Pack who sold mixed bundles of daisies, carnations, and baby's breath for 70 cents each if you bought at least 10. Amara bought 15 bundles. She arranged them into $5 bouquets on the subway ride uptown, wrapping the stems in scraps of newspaper she collected from recycling bins. By the time she climbed the steps of the 59th Street station at 8 a.m., she had 15 bouquets in her blue bucket. If she sold all of them, she would make $75. After subtracting the cost of the flowers and the subway fare, she would have $61.50. That was almost exactly enough to cover the electric bill her grandmother Dorothy had been staring at on the kitchen table for 2 weeks with her reading glasses pushed low on her nose and her lips pressed tight. Amara walked 17 blocks from the subway to the Prescott Grand Hotel, a 40-story tower of glass and limestone on the corner of Park Avenue and 53rd Street. She had chosen this hotel because it had the most foot traffic of any building on the avenue, and because the doorman on the morning shift, Gerald, had a soft spot for kids and let her sit on the sidewalk as long as she stayed out of the way and did not approach guests directly. She set up her crate. She placed the bucket beside it. She sat down. And she became invisible. That first day she sold 3 bouquets. $15. She rode the subway home, gave Dorothy $12 and ate leftover rice and beans for dinner. The second day she sold 5 bouquets. $25. By the end of the first week she had developed a system. She learned which hours were busiest, lunch and the after-work rush. She learned that women bought more flowers than men, that tourists were more generous than locals, and that saying flowers $5 with a small smile sold more than saying it with a pleading look. She also learned the rhythms of the hotel. She knew which doormen worked which shifts. She knew the valet drivers by their walks. She knew the sound of the lobby music that drifted through the revolving doors when they spun, a faint piano melody that reminded her of something her mother used to hum. And she knew Julian Prescott, even though Julian Prescott did not know her. She knew the sound of his shoes on the marble steps. She knew the exact angle of his jaw when he pushed through the doors. She knew that his car, a sleek black sedan, was always parked in the same spot at the curb, and that his driver held the door open at exactly 6 p.m., and that Julian slid into the back seat without breaking stride and without ever looking at anything below the height of his own chin. 200 times he walked past her. 200 times his polished shoes passed within 3 feet of her blue bucket. 200 times he looked straight ahead, past her, through her, as if she were made of glass. He never once bought a flower. He never once said a word. He never once saw the 10-year-old girl who sat there every single day, rain or shine, watching him with quiet brown eyes. And now, 3 months later, she had 13 minutes to convince that same man that she was real, that she could speak his guard's language, and that his life depended on believing an invisible child. Amara's mother, Irina Volkov, arrived in New York City in the spring of 2009 with exactly $312, 1 suitcase and a pocket-sized Russian English dictionary that she held so tightly during the plane ride that her fingerprints were permanently pressed into the cover. She was 19. She had grown up in a small apartment in Moscow with her mother, who cleaned offices at night, and her grandmother, who made borscht every Sunday and told stories about the siege of Leningrad that made Irina cry no matter how many times she heard them. Irina had been a good student, quick with languages and numbers, but there was no money for university, and the cleaning jobs her mother could find for her paid so little that Irina would have been 40 before she saved enough to change anything. So she came to America. Her mother's cousin lived in Queens and worked at a bakery and said she could stay on the couch until she found her feet. Irina enrolled in a community college ESL class on her second day in the country. On the first morning of class, she sat in the front row with her dictionary open and her back straight, and a tall black man with kind eyes and hands rough from mechanic work sat down next to her. His name was Kevin Brooks. He was not taking the ESL class. He was taking the automotive repair course next door. He had walked into the wrong room, realized his mistake, looked at the woman in the front row with the dictionary and the serious face and sat down anyway. "I think I'm in the wrong class," he said. Irina looked at him. She opened her dictionary. She found the word for wrong. She found the word for class. She looked back at him. "Then why you sit," she said. Kevin Brooks smiled. It was the kind of smile that started slow and took over his entire face. "Because I think I'm in the right place," he said. They were married 14 months later in a courthouse ceremony. Dorothy Brooks, Kevin's mother, sat in the front row in her best dress and cried, not because she was sad but because she had never seen her son so full of light. Irina wore a white blouse and a blue skirt and held a single daisy in her hand, and when the judge asked if she took this man she said, "Duh," and then corrected herself and said yes, and everyone laughed, including the judge. Amara was born the following year. She came out screaming, according to Dorothy, louder than any baby in the history of that hospital, and Kevin held her against his chest and whispered, "Hey there, little one, you've got a lot to say." She did. By the time she was 2, she was babbling in both English and Russian, switching between them the way other children switch between toys, picking up whichever one was closest and using it without thinking. Kevin spoke to her in English. Irina spoke to her in Russian. At dinner, the three of them sat at a small kitchen table in their 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, and the conversation bounced between languages like a rubber ball in a small room. Irina read to Amara every night in Russian. Fairy tales about firebirds and enchanted frogs and the snow maiden who melted in the spring. She sang lullabies about sleigh bells and pine forests and a moon that watched over all the sleeping children in the world. She taught Amara to count to 100 in Russian, to say please, and thank you, and I love you, and the soup is too hot, and look at the bird, and all the ordinary words that make up an ordinary beautiful life. Amara was 6 years old when the ordinary ended. It was a rainy night in November. Kevin and Irina were driving home from a friend's dinner party in New Jersey. The roads were slick. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. The police officer who came to Dorothy's door at 11:43 p.m. held his hat in his hands and could not look her in the eyes. Kevin and Irina were gone. Amara was asleep in her grandmother's apartment when it happened. She had been staying the night because Kevin and Irina wanted a grown-up evening out, and Dorothy had made her hot chocolate and braided her hair and let her sleep in the big bed with the quilt that smelled like lavender. When Amara woke up the next morning, her grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table with red eyes and trembling hands, and the world was different, and it would never be the same again. Dorothy raised Amara alone. She was 57 years old, retired from 30 years of working as a school cafeteria manager, living on a small pension and Social Security. She had arthritis in both knees and her left hip that got worse every year, and some mornings it took her 20 minutes just to stand up from the edge of the bed. But she loved that child with everything she had. She fed her. She clothed her. She walked her to school on the mornings her knees allowed it and arranged for the neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, to walk her on the mornings they did not. She helped with homework. She braided her hair. She held her on the nights when Amara woke up crying for her mama and could not stop. The one thing Dorothy could not give Amara was Russian. Dorothy spoke no Russian. Kevin had never learned more than a few phrases. The language that Irina had given her daughter lived now only inside Amara's head, like a garden with no gardener, tended only by memory. So Amara tended it herself. She whispered Russian words to herself on the walk to school. She sang the lullabies under her breath while she brushed her teeth. She read and reread the 12 Russian picture books that had survived the move from her parents' apartment to Dorothy's, turning the pages so many times that some of them came loose from the spines. At night, in her small bed in the corner of Dorothy's bedroom, Amara would close her eyes and speak to her mother in Russian. She would tell her about her day, about what she ate for lunch, about the boy in her class who could make armpit noises, about the pigeon that sat on the fire escape every morning. She would say, "Mama, ya skучал по тебе. I miss you, Mama." And then she would fall asleep. By the time Amara was 10 and sitting outside the Prescott Grand Hotel with a bucket of flowers, her Russian was not just preserved. It was perfect. She had the vocabulary of a native speaker, with a child's vocabulary frozen at age 6 and expanded through her own reading of the 12 picture books and the handful of Russian websites she accessed on the computer at the public library. Her accent was her mother's accent, Moscow clean and precise. Nobody in the world knew this. Not her teachers. Not her classmates. Not the doorman Gerald. Not the guests of the hotel. Not Julian Prescott. It was a language made of love and loss, spoken only to a ghost, and it was about to save a life. Julian Prescott had not always been cold. There were photographs in a box in the back of his bedroom closet, photographs he never looked at but could not bring himself to throw away, that showed a different man. A 22-year-old with an easy smile and open eyes, standing between his parents at his college graduation, his mother's hand on his shoulder and his father's arm around his back, all three of them laughing at something the photographer had said. His parents, Richard and Catherine Prescott, had built their hotel business from a single 12-room inn on the coast of Maine. By the time Julian graduated, they owned 4 boutique hotels across the Northeast and were planning a 5th, a flagship property in Manhattan that would carry the Prescott name into the next generation. Julian joined the business at 22. He loved it. He loved the details, the thread count of the sheets, the temperature of the lobby, the precise angle at which a concierge should incline their head when greeting a guest. He loved the math, the occupancy rates, the revenue per available room calculations, the puzzle of turning a beautiful building into a profitable one. He loved working beside his parents, learning their instincts, absorbing their philosophy that a great hotel should make every guest feel seen. His parents were gone by the time he was 25. His father died first, a heart attack at 61 while inspecting a property in Vermont. His mother followed 7 months later, pancreatic cancer that moved so fast the doctors said they were sorry before they even finished explaining the diagnosis. Julian was alone. He was 25, orphaned, and in charge of a hotel company with 53 employees and $11 million in debt his parents had taken on to fund the Manhattan flagship, which was still under construction. His parents' business partners, two men named Langford and Briggs who had been family friends for decades, waited exactly 4 months after Catherine's funeral before they made their move. They restructured the company's debt, redirected cash flows, and filed a series of legal claims that, by the time Julian's lawyers untangled them, had stripped him of 3 of the 4 existing hotels and left him with the unfinished Manhattan property and a mountain of legal fees. It took Julian 6 years to finish that building. 6 years of 18-hour days, of sleeping on a cot in the construction office, of negotiating with banks and contractors and suppliers who looked at the 20-something kid in front of them and saw easy prey. He finished it alone. He opened it alone. He stood in the completed lobby on opening night with no one beside him and looked at the chandelier his mother had picked out from a catalog 2 months before she died, and he felt nothing. Nothing at all. The Prescott Grand Hotel became the most successful independent luxury hotel in Manhattan within 3 years. Julian expanded. He acquired properties. He built an empire worth, by conservative estimates, $2.3 billion, and he did it all without trusting another human being. He had employees. He did not have friends. He had business associates. He did not have confidants. He had a penthouse on the 40th floor of his own hotel, and most nights he sat in it alone, eating dinner at a table set for one, looking out at a city of 8 million people and feeling no connection to any of them. His daily routine was rigid. He woke at 5:30 a.m. He worked out in his private gym on the 39th floor. He showered, dressed in one of his identically tailored suits, navy or charcoal, and was at his desk by 7 a.m. He worked through the day with surgical focus. Meetings, calls, reviews, decisions, all filtered through Mitchell Hale, his personal assistant, the closest thing Julian had to a trusted person. At exactly 6 p.m. Julian left. He walked through the lobby. He pushed through the revolving doors. He stepped into his car. His driver, a quiet man named Paul, held the door. Julian got in. Paul drove him to a restaurant or to a meeting or back to the penthouse. And the day was done. This routine had not changed in 4 years. The same time. The same doors. The same car. The same spot at the curb. It was as predictable as a clock and just as mechanical. Viktor Sokolov and Sergei Morozov had been hired 3 years ago on the recommendation of a security consulting firm. They were former Russian military, experienced, professional, and quiet. Julian liked quiet. He did not want bodyguards who chattered or hovered. He wanted men who stood where they were told to stand, watched what they were told to watch, and did not speak unless spoken to. Viktor and Sergei did exactly that. They were fixtures as reliable and invisible as the marble pillars in the lobby. Julian trusted them the way he trusted the elevator cables or the fire suppression system, not with affection, but with the assumption that they would perform their function without failure. He did not know that 6 months ago Viktor had been approached by a representative of Konstantin Orlov, a Russian-born businessman who had been trying to acquire Julian's hotel empire for over a year. Julian had refused every offer. Orlov had responded by finding another way. Viktor had accepted the offer. $250,000, wired to an offshore account, in exchange for access, information, and, when the time came, cooperation. Sergei had taken longer to convince. But Viktor was persuasive and Sergei was in debt, and in the end the number was enough. Julian Prescott did not know any of this. He did not know that his security had been compromised. He did not know that a rival had corrupted the men who stood closest to him. He did not know that his rigid, predictable routine, the same car, the same time, the same spot, had been studied, mapped, and turned into the blueprint for his own end. And he certainly did not know that the only person in the world who had the information to save him was a 10-year-old girl sitting 3 feet from his front door, whom he had never once seen. The Greyhound bus from Richmond pulled into the Port Authority terminal at 9:15 on a Monday morning, and Denise Brooks stepped off with 2 suitcases and the feeling in her stomach that she got every time she came back to New York, a mixture of love and dread and the memory of a brother who was no longer there. She was 29, tall and graceful, with warm brown skin and natural curly hair she wore loose around her shoulders. She had her mother's cheekbones and her brother Kevin's wide smile, the same smile that could warm a room from the doorway. She wore a bright blue blouse and jeans and white sneakers that were already scuffed from the bus ride, and she carried a canvas bag full of children's books she had been collecting at thrift stores in Richmond for the past 3 months. Denise was a daycare teacher. She worked at a small center in Churchill, where she read stories to 3-year-olds and helped 4-year-olds learn their letters and tied shoes and wiped noses and settled arguments over who got to use the blue crayon. She was good at it. She loved children with an easy, natural affection that did not require effort or performance. Kids trusted her. They climbed into her lap and told her secrets and saved their best drawings for her. She had not seen her mother or Amara in 4 months, and the guilt of that gap sat on her chest like a stone. Dorothy had called her last Wednesday night. Her voice had been calm, the way it always was when things were bad, because Dorothy Brooks did not believe in panic. "My knees are worse," Dorothy had said. "Doctor says I need both replaced eventually. For now I'm managing. But I can't walk Amara to the subway in the mornings anymore, and the neighbor Mrs. Patterson moved to Florida last month." "Mama, why didn't you tell me about Mrs. Patterson?" "Because you would have worried." "I'm supposed to worry. That's what family does." Dorothy had been quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Amara's been selling flowers outside some fancy hotel on Park Avenue. She makes enough to cover small bills. She's responsible about it. But she's 10, Denise. 10 years old, sitting on a sidewalk all day." That was all Denise needed to hear. She gave her 2 weeks' notice at the daycare center, packed her life into 2 suitcases and got on the bus. Dorothy's apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up in Washington Heights. The hallway smelled like cooking oil and pine sol. The elevator had been broken since March. Denise carried both suitcases up the stairs and knocked on the door and heard the slow, careful shuffle of her mother's feet approaching. When the door opened, Dorothy stood there in a green house dress with her cane in her right hand and her reading glasses on top of her head, and Denise's heart cracked a little because her mother looked 5 years older than she had 4 months ago. "Baby girl," Dorothy said and opened her arms. They held each other in the doorway for a long time. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that doubled as the dining room. The wallpaper in the living room was peeling at the seams, and the radiator clanked like it was trying to escape. But it was clean. Dorothy kept everything clean even when her knees screamed at her while she mopped. Amara was at the hotel selling flowers. She would not be home until after 7. Denise sat at the kitchen table with her mother and listened. Dorothy told her everything. The electric bill that was always a struggle. The rent that kept rising. The arthritis medication that cost $200 a month even with the senior discount. The food budget that was so tight Dorothy had started skipping lunch 3 days a week so Amara could have seconds at dinner. "Mama, you can't skip meals." "I eat breakfast. I eat dinner. I'm fine." "You're not fine. That's why I'm here." Dorothy looked at her daughter. Her eyes, brown and deep and tired, held a mixture of pride and something that looked like relief. "I didn't ask you to come. You didn't have to." Denise unpacked her things in Amara's bedroom. She would sleep on the fold-out couch in the living room. She placed the bag of children's books on Amara's shelf, next to the row of 12 worn Russian picture books that had been there since the week after Kevin and Irina's funeral. She picked one up. She could not read the Russian words but she knew the pictures by heart. A firebird with golden feathers. A prince on a gray horse. A forest of silver birch trees. She closed the book and put it back. The next afternoon, Denise made sandwiches, turkey and cheese on whole wheat, and took the subway to the Prescott Grand Hotel. She found Amara on the sidewalk in her red jacket, sitting on her crate with her bucket of flowers, her face serious and focused as she rearranged stems. "Aunt Denise," Amara said, and her face lit up the way only a child's face can, sudden and total and holding nothing back. Denise sat down on the sidewalk beside her, right there on the pavement in her clean jeans, and handed her a sandwich. "You didn't have to bring me lunch." "I know. Eat." They sat together and ate, and Denise watched the world of the hotel move around them. Guests in silk, doormen in uniforms, taxis pulling up and pulling away. And then, at some point during the hour she sat there, the front doors revolved and a man walked out. He was tall. Blonde hair, sharp jaw, navy suit. He moved with the kind of purpose that cleared a path without him needing to ask. His eyes were fixed straight ahead, aimed at some invisible point in the distance that had nothing to do with the sidewalk or the people on it. He walked directly past Amara. His shoe nearly clipped the edge of her blue bucket. He did not look down. He did not slow. He did not register the existence of the child sitting 3 feet from his front door. Denise watched him go. She watched him slide into a black car. She watched the car pull away. "Who is that?" Denise said. "Mr. Prescott," Amara said, chewing her sandwich. He owns the hotel. He does that every day at 6. Does he ever buy flowers? No. Amara said it without bitterness, without sadness, as a simple fact. He doesn't see me. Denise looked at her niece. She looked at the revolving doors. She looked at the spot where the black car had been. She said nothing. But something tightened in her chest, a quiet anger on behalf of a child who had already lost too much to be invisible on top of everything else. Amara had a theory about invisibility. She had thought about it a lot, sitting on her crate day after day watching people walk past her without seeing her. She had decided that invisibility was not really about being small or poor or young. It was about what people expected to see. When rich people walked out of a luxury hotel, they expected to see doormen and taxis and other rich people. They did not expect to see a 10-year-old girl with a bucket of flowers. So their eyes skipped over her the way eyes skip over a fire hydrant or a mailbox or a crack in the sidewalk. She was not part of the picture they expected, so their brains simply edited her out. It was not cruelty exactly. Amara did not think most of them were cruel. It was just a kind of blindness that came with never having to look down. She had learned to use it. Invisible people heard things. Invisible people saw things. The doorman talked freely in front of her, gossiping about guests and managers and weekend plans, because she was 10 and therefore not real. Guests had full phone conversations within earshot of her crate, discussing business deals and dinner reservations and marital arguments, because a child with a bucket of flowers was less notable than the potted fern by the entrance. And the 2 Russian security guards talked in front of her most of all. Victor and Sergei usually stood near the side entrance of the hotel, about 20 feet from Amara's crate. But several times a day they walked past her spot, sometimes pausing near the marble pillar just a few feet away to have quiet conversations in Russian. Amara had been listening to their Russian for months. At first it was comforting. Hearing Russian spoken by adult voices reminded her of her mother, of the sound of the language in a living mouth rather than in her own whispered memory. She would close her eyes sometimes and just let the sounds wash over her, the hard consonants and rolling vowels, and for a moment she was 4 years old again and Mama was reading about the Firebird. Their conversations were usually boring. Work schedules. Shift changes. Complaints about the cold or the late delivery of lunch. Victor sometimes talked about a woman he was seeing. Sergei complained about his landlord. But about 2 weeks before the Tuesday that changed everything, Amara noticed a shift. The conversations got quieter. Victor and Sergei began standing closer together, their heads nearly touching. They stopped talking about personal things and started using words Amara did not immediately recognize, technical words, words she had to think about before she understood. She heard the word Ostroistvo, device. She heard the word mashina, car. She heard the name Orlov, spoken so quietly she almost missed it. She heard the phrase Pozili Togo. After that. After it is done. And she heard Victor say once in a voice as flat and cold as a frozen lake, On any Pachevsviet Nichego. You will not feel anything. Amara did not put it together. Not then. She was 10. She knew the words individually, but the picture they formed was so far outside her reality that her mind could not assemble it. A device. A car. A man who would not feel anything. These were words from a movie, not from real life, not from the sidewalk outside a hotel where she sold flowers for $5. So she set the words aside in a quiet corner of her mind and went on with her days. She sold flowers. She rode the subway home. She gave the money to Dorothy. She did her homework at the kitchen table while Aunt Denise cooked dinner and Dorothy sat in her chair with her feet elevated on a cushion. She read her Russian books. She whispered to her mother in the dark. And every day at 5:55 p.m. she watched Julian Prescott walk past her without seeing her, and she thought about invisibility, and she did not know that the words she had overheard were the most important words anyone in this city would hear that year. She did not know that the quiet corner of her mind where she had stored them was a ticking clock. And the clock was almost at 0. The Tuesday started like every other day. Amara woke at 6 a.m. She helped Dorothy with breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, because Dorothy's hands were stiff in the mornings and cracking eggs was hard. Denise was already up, making coffee and humming something soft and tuneless. You eating enough? Dorothy said, watching Amara push eggs around her plate. Yes, Grandma. You sure? You look thin. She looks fine, Mama, Denise said from the counter. Stop. Amara smiled. She liked having Aunt Denise here. The apartment felt less heavy. Denise brought a kind of brightness with her, a warmth that filled the spaces between things. She told funny stories about the kids at her old daycare. She danced in the kitchen while she cooked. She braided Amara's hair at night and told her she was smart and brave and beautiful, and Amara believed her because Aunt Denise never said things she did not mean. After breakfast, Amara took the subway to the wholesale market. She bought her flowers from Mrs. Pack, who nodded at her and said, "Good morning, flower girl," which was the closest thing to a name anyone at the market had given her. She made her bouquets on the subway, wrapping stems in newspaper, arranging the daisies and baby's breath and the one pink carnation she always put in the center of each bundle. She arrived at the hotel at 3 p.m. Later than usual because Denise had asked her to stay home for lunch. Gerald, the doorman, was at his post. "Afternoon, little miss," he said. He always called her that. Never her name. She had told him her name once, months ago, and he had nodded and forgotten it immediately. "Afternoon," Amara said. She set up her crate. She placed her bucket. She sat. The afternoon was slow. October had turned cool and the sidewalk foot traffic had thinned. She sold 2 bouquets by 4 p.m. and 1 more by 5 p.m. $15. Not great. She would need to make up the difference tomorrow. At 5:30 p.m. she saw Victor and Sergei exit through the side door of the hotel. This was unusual. They normally stayed inside until Julian left at 6 p.m., flanking the lobby doors like statues. But today they walked outside, circled the building, and came to stand near the marble pillar, about 4 feet from Amara's crate. They were tense. Amara could see it in their shoulders, in the way Victor kept touching the back of his neck, in the way Sergei's eyes moved in quick, darting sweeps across the street. Something was different. Something was wrong. She did not look at them. She had learned long ago that the best way to stay invisible was to never look directly at the people you were listening to. She kept her eyes on her flowers. She kept her hands moving, adjusting stems, smoothing newspaper. She breathed normally. At 5:47 p.m. Victor spoke. "Sayo gotovo. Everything is ready." And the ground dropped out from under Amara's world. Victor's voice was low and fast, but Amara's Russian ears caught every word as clearly as if he were reading from a page. Ustroistvo pod sidnem voditilia. Kogda on povernyat klaik v shiest, sayo konchino. The device is under the driver's seat. When he turns the key at 6, it is over. Sergei spoke. His voice was tighter, higher, nervous. Orlov potverdil oplatu. Segidnya nakyu, pozl togo kak sayo zakinkitsia. Orlov confirmed the payment. "Tonight, after everything is finished." Victor again. "Come. Almost bored. Try Nadsat minute. My idiom na vostok po Lexington v moment, kogda on vikadit is denia. My eni oglaya de vamsia. 13 minutes. We walk east on Lexington the moment he exits the building. We do not look back. Amara's hands stopped. A daisy stem fell from her fingers. She understood every word. Every single word. And this time, unlike the fragments she had heard over the past 2 weeks, the picture assembled itself instantly and completely, like a photograph developing in chemical solution. The device. The car. 6 o'clock. The key. It is over. They were going to end Julian Prescott. In 13 minutes. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. The sounds of the street, taxis, voices, footsteps, wind, all faded to a dull roar behind the pounding of her own heartbeat. She looked at the black car parked at the curb. Julian's car. The car he got into every single day at 6 p.m. The car that was now, according to the words she had just heard, carrying something underneath the driver's seat that would go off the moment the engine started. She looked at the revolving doors. Julian was still inside. He would walk through those doors in 12 minutes. She looked at Victor and Sergei. They were already moving, walking with practiced casualness toward the east end of the block, heading for Lexington Avenue. They were leaving. They did not look back at the car. They did not look at her. Because she was invisible. Amara's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Her legs felt weak. Her stomach turned over. She was 10 years old. She had no phone. She knew no one inside that hotel. The one person she needed to reach was a man who had never looked at her, never heard her voice, never acknowledged that she was alive. She had 12 minutes. She stood up from her crate. Her knees wobbled. She left her bucket of flowers on the sidewalk and walked toward the revolving doors. Gerald, the doorman, stepped into her path. "Whoa, little miss. You know you can't go in there. I need to talk to someone inside. It's important." "I'm sure it is, sweetheart. But I can't let you in. Hotel policy. Please. It's really, really important." Gerald looked at her with the patient, dismissive kindness of a man who had heard 100 people say something was really important and had learned that it almost never was. "Tell you what. Go back to your spot. If someone comes out that you need to talk to, You can talk to them out here. Okay. He guided her gently back toward the sidewalk with one hand on her shoulder. Amara stood on the pavement. She looked at the revolving doors. She looked at the black car. 11 minutes. She would have to wait for him to come out. She would have to stop him before he reached the car. She would have to make a man who had never seen her believe that she was telling the truth. And she would have to do it in Russian. Amara stood 3 feet from the revolving doors with her hands at her sides and her heart in her throat. She had positioned herself directly in the path between the doors and the curb where the black car was parked. If Julian walked his usual route, straight line, no deviation, he would have to pass within arm's reach of her. She would have maybe 2 seconds to get his attention before he was past her and at the car. 2 seconds. That was all the invisible got. She counted the minutes in her head. She did not have a watch. She did not have a phone. She counted by heartbeats, roughly the way her mother had taught her to count seconds during thunderstorms. 1 1,000. 2 1,000. 3 1,000. The city moved around her. A taxi honked. A woman in a red coat walked past talking on her phone about a dinner reservation. A bicycle messenger cut through traffic, weaving between cars. The world continued as if nothing was happening, as if there was not a device under the seat of a black car 10 feet away, as if a 10-year-old girl was not standing on the sidewalk with the weight of a man's life in her small, trembling hands. Amara ran through the words in her head. She would speak in Russian. That was the only way. If she spoke in English, he would hear a child begging for money or attention and he would walk past. But if she spoke in Russian, if she said the specific words she had heard his guards say, the details no outsider could possibly know, he would have to stop. He would have to listen. She rehearsed. Vashi okraniki kodiat vas ubit. Ustroistvo v vashii mashain. V shias chasov, kogda vy zavidiot dvigatel. Potsalusta, any sadites vieta mashinu. Your guards want to end you. There is a device in your car. At 6 o'clock when you start the engine. Please do not get in that car. She whispered it under her breath, over and over, feeling the shape of each word in her mouth, making sure her pronunciation was clear, making sure she would not stumble. At 5:52 p.m., the revolving doors turned and Julian Prescott walked out. He was in his navy suit. His tie was loosened at the collar. His jaw was tight, the way it always was at the end of the day, as if the hours had pressed something hard against his face and left an impression. His eyes were aimed straight ahead, locked on the black car at the curb. He moved fast. Long strides. The kind of walk that said, "Do not stop me." Amara stepped into his path. He nearly walked into her. He pulled up short, startled, and looked down. For the first time in more than 200 days, Julian Prescott looked at Amara Brooks. He saw a small girl in a faded red jacket with 2 puffs of curly black hair and big brown eyes that were wide and shining with something he could not identify. Fear. Desperation. Urgency. All 3 at once. His face shifted from surprise to annoyance. He had seen 100 street kids in his life and they all wanted the same thing. "I don't have cash on me," he said and moved to step around her. Amara grabbed his sleeve. Her small hand closed around the fabric of his jacket just above the wrist and she held on. He looked down at her hand, then at her face, and his expression hardened. "Let go." Amara opened her mouth and spoke in Russian. Potsalusta, any sadites vieta mashinu. Vashi okraniki Viktorai Sergei, oni kodiat vas ubit. Ustroistvo pod sidnum voditilia. V shias chasov, kogda vy zavidiot dvigatel, ono srabateat. Orlov zaplatilim. Potsalusta. Potsalusta, ye govoryu pravdu. Please do not get in that car. Your guards, Victor and Sergei, they want to end you. There is a device under the driver's seat. At 6 o'clock when you start the engine it will go off. Orlov paid them. Please, please, I am telling the truth. Julian Prescott froze. He did not move. He did not speak. He did not breathe. He stood on the sidewalk outside his own hotel with a 10-year-old girl gripping his sleeve and stared at her as if she had just torn a hole in the fabric of his reality. She was speaking Russian. Perfect Russian. Moscow accent. And she was saying the names of his guards, the name of a rival he had refused to do business with, and specific details about his car and his schedule that no child, no stranger, no one outside his most inner circle could possibly know. 5 seconds of silence. The longest 5 seconds of Amara's life. Then Julian spoke. His voice was very quiet. "How do you know those names?" Amara's hand was still on his sleeve. Her fingers were shaking. "I sit here every day. Right there." She pointed at her crate, switching to English. "I hear them talk. They talk in Russian. They don't know I speak Russian. My mama was Russian. She taught me. I heard them say everything. Today. Just now. They walked east on Lexington. They said they wouldn't look back. Julian looked at the black car. He looked at his watch. 5:55 p.m. 5 minutes. He did not let go of the child's gaze. Something was happening behind his eyes, a rapid calculation, a weighing of probability, a man who trusted no one in the world trying to decide whether to trust a 10-year-old girl. Amara saw the doubt. She saw the wall. And she said one more thing in Russian in a voice that was so small and so steady that it cut through everything. Ya any proshu deneg. Ya proshu vas any yumarat, da. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking you not to die. Julian pulled out his phone. He dialed. Mitchell. Do not let anyone near my car. Call the police. No. Tell them there may be a device in the vehicle. Under the driver's seat. Do it now. He listened for 2 seconds. Then he said, I'll explain when you get down here. Do it. He hung up. He looked at Amara. He was still standing in the same spot, 5 feet from the car he got into every single day, the car that now sat at the curb like a sleeping thing with something terrible inside it. What is your name? He said. Amara. Amara. Come with me. Away from the car. Now. He took her hand. His grip was firm but not rough. They walked together, the billionaire and the flower girl, away from the black car, away from the curb, back toward the hotel entrance, and he did not let go of her hand until they were inside the lobby and the glass doors had closed behind them. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Mitchell arrived in the lobby at a run. Hotel security locked down the entrance. 3 police cars arrived within 8 minutes. A bomb disposal unit was called. The car was cordoned off. The sidewalk was evacuated. Amara sat on a velvet bench in the hotel lobby, the first time she had ever been inside the building, and she looked around at the chandeliers and the marble floors and the enormous flower arrangements in crystal vases, and she thought about how strange it was that she had been sitting outside this place for 7 months and it looked nothing like she had imagined. At 6:14 p.m., a police officer confirmed that a device had been found under the driver's seat of Julian Prescott's car. At 6:22 p.m., Viktor Sokolov and Sergei Morozov were located 4 blocks east on Lexington Avenue, exactly where they said they would be, and were taken into custody. At 6:30 p.m., Julian Prescott sat down next to Amara on the velvet bench. He did not speak for a long time. His hands were in his lap. His face was pale. The cold composure that he wore like a suit of armor had cracked, and underneath it, for the first time in years, there was something raw and real and terrified. You saved my life, he said. His voice was not steady. Amara looked at him. Yes, she said. Because she had, and she was 10, and 10-year-olds do not know how to be modest about facts. Julian Prescott almost smiled. It was the first time his face had tried to make that shape in a very long time. Right now, think about this. If you walked past the same child every single day for months and never once looked at her, never once noticed she existed, and that same child risked everything to save your life anyway, what would that say about her heart? And what would it say about yours? If this story is already making you feel something, hit that subscribe button and stay with me to the end. Because what Julian does next will change everything. The police were in the lobby for 3 hours. Detectives took statements. Julian's legal team arrived. Mitchell coordinated with building security to lock down the hotel and inform staff. Camera footage was pulled. Phone records were requested. The name Konstantin Orlov was mentioned, and the lead detective, a woman named Patricia Calloway with sharp eyes and a calm voice, wrote it down and said she would need to speak with Julian extensively over the coming days. Through all of it, Amara sat on the velvet bench. No one had told her she could leave. No one had told her she could not. She simply sat, her red jacket still zipped, her hands folded in her lap, and watched the grown-ups move around her in controlled urgency. She had called Dorothy from the hotel's front desk phone, the first time she had ever used a phone that was not a library computer, and told her grandmother she would be late. How late? Dorothy had asked. I don't know, Grandma. Something happened at the hotel. I'm fine. I'll tell you when I get home. Dorothy was silent for a moment. Then she said, You're not hurt. No, ma'am. Okay. I'll keep dinner warm. By 9 p.m. the lobby had emptied. The police were gone. The car had been towed. The bomb disposal unit had left. The sidewalk was open again, though Amara's overturned bucket of flowers still sat on the pavement where she had left it, the daisies wilting in the October night air. Julian found her still on the bench. He had changed out of his suit into a gray pullover and dark trousers, the first time Amara had seen him in anything other than his daily uniform. Without the suit he looked different. Younger. Less like a man made of marble. He sat down beside her. Not across from her. Not standing over her. Beside her on the same bench like an equal. "I owe you an apology," he said. Amara looked at him. "I have walked past you every day for months. I never once looked at you. I never once asked your name. And tonight you saved my life." He paused. His hands were clasped between his knees. His voice was careful, as if he were choosing each word with the same precision he used for everything else, but this time the precision was not about control. It was about not getting it wrong. "I was wrong," he said. "I was wrong to not see you. I am sorry." Amara nodded. "It's okay." "No, it isn't. But thank you for saying that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Will you tell me about yourself? How you speak Russian? Where you live? Who takes care of you?" So Amara told him. She told him about her mother, Irina, from Moscow. About her father, Kevin, who fixed cars and had the best smile in the world. About the car accident. About Dorothy, who had bad knees and a good heart. About Aunt Denise, who had come from Richmond to help. About the flowers, the wholesale market, Mrs. Pack, the $5 bouquets, the electric bills and the rent and the arthritis medication. She told him everything in the plain, undecorated way that children tell things, without self-pity, without performance, just the facts of her life laid out like items on a table. Julian listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. When she was done, he said, "I would like to take you home. Is that all right?" "Yes." Julian drove her himself. Not his usual car, obviously. Mitchell brought a vehicle from the hotel's fleet, a silver SUV, and Julian got behind the wheel. It was the first time he had driven himself anywhere in 4 years. The drive to Washington Heights took 40 minutes. Amara sat in the passenger seat and told him about the pigeon that lived on her fire escape, and about the library where she used the computers, and about her favorite Russian fairy tale, the one about the Snow Maiden. Julian pulled up outside Dorothy's building. He looked at the graffiti on the first-floor wall. He looked at the broken elevator sign in the lobby window. He looked up at the 4th floor where a light was on behind thin curtains. "I'll walk you up," he said. "It's 4 flights. The elevator's broken. I can handle stairs." They climbed. Julian's shoes, Italian leather, were not made for stairwells that smelled like cooking oil. He did not complain. Dorothy opened the door before Amara could knock. She had been waiting by the peephole. Her eyes moved from Amara to the tall blonde man standing behind her, and her expression was the one she wore when she was assessing a situation, calm on the surface, calculating underneath. "Grandma, this is Mr. Prescott. He owns the hotel where I sell flowers." "I know who he is," Dorothy said. Her voice was even. "Come in." The apartment was small and warm and smelled like reheated chicken and collard greens. The wallpaper was peeling. The furniture was old but clean. On a shelf by the window, 12 Russian picture books were lined up in a neat row. Denise came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. She stopped when she saw Julian. She looked at him, then at Amara, then at Dorothy. "What happened?" she said. Amara told the story again. This time she told it for her family in English from the beginning. The guards. The Russian words. The device. The grab of his sleeve. The 13 minutes. Dorothy sank into her chair. Her hand went to her chest. Denise stared at her niece. Then she crossed the room and knelt down and pulled Amara into a hug so tight the child squeaked. "Don't you ever scare me like that," Denise whispered. Julian stood in the doorway of the small apartment and watched this family hold each other, and something inside him that had been locked for a very long time began to turn. "Mrs. Brooks," he said to Dorothy, "your granddaughter saved my life tonight. I understand that words are not enough. But I want you to know that I intend to make sure this family never struggles again." Dorothy looked at him. She was not a woman who was easily impressed by money or power. She had lived 67 years on this earth, survived the loss of her son, raised her granddaughter on a pension, and she did not need a billionaire to tell her about struggle. But she was also not a woman who refused help when it was offered with sincerity. She had too much sense for that. "I appreciate that, Mr. Prescott," she said. "Sit down. Have some chicken." Julian Prescott, owner of a $2.3 billion hotel empire, sat down at Dorothy Brooks's kitchen table and ate reheated chicken and collard greens off a plate with a small chip in the rim. And it was the best meal he had eaten in 10 years. The next morning, Julian Prescott's phone rang at 6 a.m., which was unusual because he was the one who usually made the calls. It was Mitchell. The investigation was moving fast. Victor and Sergei had been cooperative, partly because the evidence was overwhelming and partly because their lawyer had explained the difference between cooperating and not cooperating in very clear terms. They had named Konstantin Orlov as the man who hired them. Orlov was a Russian-born businessman based in London who had been trying to acquire Julian's hotel properties for over a year. When Julian refused every offer, Orlov had decided to remove him from the equation entirely. "Detective Calloway wants to meet with you this afternoon," Mitchell said. "And she will need a formal statement from the child." "Her name is Amara," Julian said. Mitchell paused. "Right. From Amara." Julian spent the morning doing something he had never done before. He made a list that had nothing to do with business. He wrote down everything he remembered from the night before. The apartment with the peeling wallpaper. Dorothy's cane. The 12 Russian picture books. The missing elevator. The reheated chicken. The look on Denise's face when she heard what her 10-year-old niece had done. Then he made calls. Not to lawyers or bankers or hotel managers. To doctors. To school administrators. To a real estate agent. To a financial planner he trusted, which for Julian Prescott was a very short list. By noon he had arranged the following. A full medical evaluation for Dorothy Brooks at one of the best orthopedic clinics in the city, with all costs covered. An education trust for Amara Brooks, fully funded, to cover private school tuition through high school and a 4-year university degree at any institution of her choosing. A consultation with a real estate agent to find a suitable apartment for the Brooks family in a safe neighborhood with an elevator and laundry and enough space for 3 people to live comfortably. He drove to Washington Heights at 2 p.m. Denise answered the door. She was wearing a green blouse and her curly hair was pulled up in a high bun, and she looked at him with an expression that was not quite suspicion but was definitely not yet trust. "Mr. Prescott." "Julian. Please." "Julian." She said it like she was testing the weight of it. "Come in." He sat at the kitchen table and told them what he had arranged. He spoke clearly, without flourish, without preamble. "Here is what I would like to do. Here is why. Here is how." Dorothy listened. Denise listened. Amara listened from her chair with her knees pulled up to her chest. When he finished, Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You don't owe us this." "I owe you everything," Julian said. "Your granddaughter saved my life. She did what any good person would do." "No, Mrs. Brooks. She did what a brave person would do. And she was able to do it because of the language her mother gave her, and because of the kindness you raised her with. I am grateful. Please let me show it." Dorothy looked at Denise. Some kind of silent communication passed between them, the way it does between mothers and daughters who have shared a lifetime of knowing each other's thoughts. Denise looked at Julian. "We accept," she said. "With gratitude." Amara smiled. It was the widest smile Julian had seen in years. Over the following weeks, the arrangements took shape. Dorothy saw the orthopedic specialist, who put her on a new medication that reduced the inflammation in her knees enough that she could walk without the cane on good days. The real estate agent found a bright, spacious apartment on the Upper West Side, 3rd floor, with an elevator and big windows and a kitchen where 3 people could cook at the same time without bumping elbows. Amara started at a private school that had a language program including Russian. On her first day, she wore a new blue jacket and carried a backpack and walked through the front doors of a school where people knew her name. She was not invisible anymore. Julian helped Denise connect with a teaching position at a well-regarded early childhood center on the west side, close to the new apartment. The center director interviewed her, watched her interact with the children for 20 minutes, and hired her on the spot. "You have a gift," the director told her. "I just like kids," Denise said. But it was more than money and arrangements. That was what surprised everyone, including Julian himself. He visited. Every week, sometimes twice. He brought Amara books in Russian, real novels now, not just picture books. He brought Dorothy a heating pad for her knees and a subscription to the crossword puzzle magazine she mentioned liking. He sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee that Denise made too strong and listened to Dorothy's stories about Kevin, about the boy his mother had raised, the man he had become, the father he had been for 6 short years. Julian had never heard anyone talk about a parent with that much love. His own parents had been kind but busy, always at the hotels, always working. Dorothy spoke about Kevin the way people speak about someone who was the center of their world. "He would have liked you," Dorothy said one evening. "I doubt that," Julian said. "I walked past his daughter 200 times without looking at her. But you're looking now. That's what matters." Denise was harder. Not hard in a mean way, but hard in the way that people are hard when they have had to be strong for too long and they are not sure if it is safe to soften. She was grateful for what Julian was doing for her family. She never pretended otherwise. But she was not dazzled by him. She did not flatter him. She did not laugh at his jokes out of politeness, and when he made a comment about how he preferred to work alone because it was more efficient, she looked him in the eye and said, "Working alone just means nobody catches your mistakes." He blinked. That's a fair point." "I know." She challenged him. She asked him questions about his life that no one had asked in years, questions that had nothing to do with his net worth or his hotel empire. She asked him what he did for fun. He did not know. She asked him who his friends were. He did not have any. She asked him what he was afraid of. "Everything," he almost said, and then he caught himself and said, "Nothing," and she raised an eyebrow that told him she did not believe him. And slowly, the way a frost melts in early spring, something between them changed. It was not a rush. It was not a flood. It was a gradual warming, a slow thaw, the kind of thing you do not notice until one day you realize the ground is soft where it used to be hard. Julian noticed it the evening Denise laughed at something he said, really laughed, with her head back and her hand on the table, and he felt something in his chest he had not felt since his parents were alive. He noticed it the afternoon Denise called him to tell him about Amara's first Russian test at school, and his first thought was not about the test but about the sound of her voice. He noticed it the night he drove home from Dorothy's apartment and realized he was already looking forward to the next visit, not for Amara's sake or Dorothy's sake, but for Denise's. He was careful. He did not push. He did not presume. He remembered what Denise had said about working alone, about not catching your own mistakes, and he thought that maybe the biggest mistake he had made in the last 10 years was convincing himself that he was better off alone. One evening in late November after dinner, Denise walked him to the door of the apartment. Amara was asleep. Dorothy was in her room. The hallway was quiet. "Thank you," Denise said. "For everything. You've already thanked me. Many times." "I know. But I mean it differently now." He looked at her. "How do you mean it?" She held his gaze. "I mean that you are a good man, Julian Prescott. I did not think that when I first saw you walk past my niece like she was a piece of furniture. But I think it now." "I'm learning," he said. "We all are." There was a moment. A silence that was not empty but full, the way a pause in a song can contain more than the notes around it. They stood in the doorway, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, and something passed between them that neither of them named but both of them felt. "Good night, Julian." "Good night, Denise." He walked down the hallway smiling. He could not remember the last time he had done that. Meanwhile, the investigation into Konstantin Orlov expanded. Detective Calloway's team, working with federal agencies and international contacts, traced the financial trail from Orlov's London operation to the offshore accounts used to pay Victor and Sergei. The case was solid. But Calloway warned Julian that Orlov's network included several associates who were still unaccounted for, and until they were located, there was a concern that witnesses, including Amara, could be at risk. Julian's response was immediate and absolute. He hired a private security firm, vetted personally by Mitchell, to provide around-the-clock protection for the Brooks family. The security was discreet: a driver for the school run, a guard posted at the apartment building, a direct line to Julian's phone at all hours. "You don't have to do all this," Denise said when he told her. "Yes, I do," Julian said. "She's going to be fine. We're going to be fine." "I know. But I am not going to let anything happen to your family. Not now. Not ever." Denise looked at him for a long moment. And then she nodded. "Okay," she said. "Okay." 3 things happened in December that changed everything. The first was that Konstantin Orlov was arrested. It happened on a Tuesday morning in a hotel suite in London, 3 blocks from Buckingham Palace. British authorities, working in coordination with the FBI and Interpol, executed a carefully planned operation that resulted in Orlov and 4 of his associates being taken into custody simultaneously. The evidence was substantial: financial records, recorded phone calls, testimony from Victor and Sergei, and within hours Orlov's network was dismantled. Detective Calloway called Julian personally to deliver the news. "It's over," she said. "The witness, your young friend, she is safe. All threats have been neutralized." Julian hung up the phone and sat in his office for a long time, looking out the window at the city below. Then he picked up the phone again and called Denise. "It's done. Orlov has been arrested. Amara is safe." He heard Denise exhale. It was a long breath, the kind that releases something heavy. "Thank God," she said. "Come to the hotel tonight. All of you. Dorothy, Amara, you. I want to celebrate. I want to show you something." The second thing that happened was that Amara got her report card. All A's. Every subject. And her Russian teacher had written a note in the margin. "Amara's command of the Russian language is extraordinary. Her pronunciation and comprehension suggest near-native fluency." She is a remarkable student. Amara brought the report card to Dorothy, who held it at arm's length because she could not find her reading glasses, and then held it close because her eyes were watering. Your mama would be so proud, Dorothy said. Amara nodded. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that some feelings were too big for tears. But she held her grandmother's hand and did not let go for a long time. That evening, Julian sent a car to the apartment. Not a black sedan. A silver SUV with heated seats and a driver who held the door open and called Dorothy ma'am, and called Amara miss, and called Denise Ms. Brooks, with a respect that made Denise smile. They drove to the Prescott Grand Hotel. It was decorated for the holidays, white lights in the windows, evergreen garlands around the entrance, a tall tree in the lobby covered with silver and blue ornaments. The doorman Gerald stood at his post. Amara walked through the revolving doors. Gerald looked at her. Good evening, Miss Amara, he said. He knew her name now. Everyone at the hotel knew her name now. Julian met them in the lobby. He was not in his usual suit. He wore a blue pullover and gray trousers and he was smiling, and Amara thought that his smile was getting better the more he practiced it. I want to show you something, he said. All of you. He led them through the lobby, past the front desk, past the restaurant, to a corner near the main entrance that Amara had never seen from the inside. There, in the space between the concierge desk and the grand staircase, stood a small, beautiful flower stand. It was made of light wood with a glass front. Inside were bundles of fresh flowers, daisies, carnations, baby's breath, roses, arranged in colorful bouquets. A small sign on the front read, in elegant lettering, Amara's Flowers. I've partnered with Mrs. Pack at the wholesale market, Julian said. She'll supply the flowers. The hotel staff will maintain the stand. Every dollar in profit goes to a new foundation I'm establishing for children who have been overlooked, children in shelters and foster care, children selling flowers on sidewalks because they have no other choice. He looked at Amara. It's named after you. If that's all right. Amara walked to the flower stand. She touched the glass. She looked at the daisies inside, the same kind of daisy she had sold from a blue bucket on the sidewalk for 7 months. It's all right, she said. Dorothy was crying. She was sitting in a lobby chair with her cane across her lap, and she was crying openly, without embarrassment, the way people cry when something good happens after a very long time of hard things. Denise was not crying. She was standing very still, looking at Julian with an expression that held everything she could not say in a hotel lobby in front of her mother and her niece. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Something that had been building slowly for weeks, like a sunrise that starts so gradually you do not notice the sky is bright until you look up and the whole world is lit. The third thing that happened in December was quieter. It was Christmas Eve. Julian had been invited to the Brooks apartment for dinner, and he had arrived early with gifts wrapped in blue paper and a bottle of apple cider and a bag of supplies for a traditional Russian dinner he had asked his hotel chef to prepare. Beef stroganoff, olive salad, and pierogi. I thought we could make Amara's mother's food, he told Dorothy. If that would be all right. Dorothy put her hand on his arm. That would be just fine, she said. They cooked together in the small kitchen, all 4 of them. Denise managed the stroganoff. Dorothy made the salad from her chair, instructing Julian on the precise size to cut the potatoes. Amara rolled the pierogi dough and told Julian the story of each Russian dish, the way her mother had told her. Mama said pierogi are little gifts from the kitchen, Amara said. You fold them up like presents. Julian looked at his hands, covered in flour, working clumsily at the dough while a 10-year-old girl showed him how to fold the edges. He thought about his penthouse on the 40th floor of his hotel, where he had eaten dinner alone for years, and he thought about this kitchen, small and warm and alive with the sounds of people who loved each other, and he knew which one was home. After dinner, Amara fell asleep on the couch with a Russian book open on her chest. Dorothy was dozing in her chair. The apartment was quiet. Julian and Denise sat at the kitchen table. The dishes were done. The leftovers were wrapped. The city outside the window was glittering with holiday lights. I have something to ask you, Julian said. Okay. I know this might be too soon. And I know we haven't known each other very long. But I also know that I spent 10 years convincing myself that being alone was the same as being strong, and it isn't, and I don't want to spend another 10 years learning that lesson again. Denise looked at him. I'm not asking for anything big tonight. I'm asking if you would go to dinner with me. Just the 2 of us. A real dinner. A date. Denise tilted her head. Julian Prescott is asking me on a date. He is. And he is more nervous than he has been about anything in a very long time. She smiled. It was the smile that Kevin Brooks had passed down to his sister, the one that started slow and took over her entire face. Yes, she said. I would like that. 1 year later. The rooftop terrace of the Prescott Grand Hotel, 40 stories above the city, on a warm evening in December. White string lights strung between the terrace rails. The city below spread out like a carpet of glittering gold and silver. A small table for two with candles that flickered in the gentle wind. Julian and Denise had been together for 11 months. 11 months of dinners and walks and quiet evenings at the apartment and Sunday mornings at the farmer's market and difficult conversations and easy laughter and the slow, patient work of two people building something real. Julian had changed. Not overnight. Not in a single moment of revelation. But gradually, layer by layer, the way ice melts in a warm room. He smiled more. He listened more. He had lunch with Mitchell now, not at his desk but at a table face to face. He knew the names of his doormen. He knew the names of their children. He had started visiting the flower stand in the lobby every morning, adjusting the bouquets, checking the water, and thinking about a little girl in a red jacket who had taught him what it meant to see. Dorothy was doing well. The new medication and regular physical therapy had given her back much of her mobility. She walked without the cane most days. She had joined a senior center near the apartment where she played dominoes and argued about politics and made friends who called her, even though she told them not to. Amara was thriving. She was at the top of her class. She was studying Russian, French, and Mandarin. Her Russian teacher had entered her in a city-wide language competition, and she had placed first. She still kept a small jar of flowers on her desk at home, daisies from the wholesale market, bought with her own allowance because some things you do not let go of even when you do not need to anymore. On the rooftop, after dessert, Julian reached across the table and took Denise's hand. I have another question, he said. You always have questions. This is the most important one. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out a small box. He opened it. The ring was simple and beautiful, a single diamond set in a gold band, nothing ostentatious, nothing showy because Julian had learned over the past year that the most valuable things in the world are not the biggest or the brightest but the ones that matter. Denise Brooks, he said. You saw through me when I could not see anything. You challenged me when everyone else just agreed with me. You let me into your family when I had none of my own. You taught me that strength is not the same as solitude. And you did it all with a kindness and patience I did not deserve but am grateful for every single day. He paused. Will you marry me? Denise looked at the ring. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright. Yes, she said. With gratitude. He slid the ring onto her finger. They stood up from the table and held each other on the rooftop of the building where it all began, 40 stories above the sidewalk where a 10-year-old girl had grabbed a stranger's sleeve and said the words that changed everything. The wedding was held in the spring in the garden behind the Prescott Grand Hotel. White chairs on green grass. Blue hydrangeas and tall vases. A string quartet playing something soft. The sun was bright and warm, and the sky was the kind of blue that makes you believe the world is good. Dorothy sat in the front row in a green dress and new shoes and no cane. She cried before the ceremony even started and did not stop until it was over. Mitchell stood as Julian's best man. He wore a suit that fit him for the first time in his life and looked deeply uncomfortable and deeply happy at the same time. Amara was the flower girl. She wore a white dress with a blue sash and carried a basket of daisies and baby's breath, the same flowers she had sold from a blue bucket on the sidewalk 2 years earlier. She walked down the aisle with her chin up and her curly hair loose around her shoulders and her brown eyes shining, and every person in the garden watched her and saw her, really saw her, and Amara Brooks was not invisible anymore. Julian stood at the altar and watched Denise walk toward him. She wore a simple white dress with a maroon sash at the waist, and her curly hair was down, and she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, not because of how she looked but because of who she was. They said their vows. Simple words. True words. The kind of words that do not need decoration because they carry enough weight on their own. After the ceremony, in the quiet moment before the reception began, Amara walked up to Julian. She tugged on his jacket sleeve, the same way she had on the sidewalk that October evening, and he looked down at her, the way he always did now, with eyes that saw. She whispered something in Russian. Spasibo, Papa. Thank you, Papa. Julian's eyes filled. He knelt down in front of her, right there on the grass in his wedding suit, and he said back to her, in the Russian he had been studying for a year, with an accent that was terrible and a heart that was full. Spasibo, moya malenkaya heroinya. Thank you, my little heroine. Amara smiled. Julian smiled. Denise, watching from 3 feet away, smiled through her own tears. And Dorothy, from her chair in the front row, looked at her granddaughter, the child of her lost son and a Russian woman who had carried love across an ocean, and she whispered to herself so quietly that no one heard. You see, Kevin. She's going to be just fine.